I love camping, being out there in the woods with nothing but the stars overhead and the crackle of a fire. It always felt like the perfect way to escape the chaos of life, to be immersed in nature's raw, quiet beauty. This time, though, it was different. It was more unsettling, even before the sun sank beyond the horizon. My best friend Ryan and I had chosen a remote campsite deep in the woods, one we'd read about in some off the beaten path hiking guide. We loaded up our gear and hiked a few miles until we found the clearing, a spot isolated enough that no other hikers had followed. We set up our tent, strung a tarp to guard against any possible rain, and soon the sky was streaked with deep orange and crimson. As night fell, we ate dinner by the fire and joked about horror movies, laughing over the absurdity of them. Ryan even did a ridiculous impression of a slasher movie villain. But then came the first sound, a snap, like a twig breaking in the darkness. We both froze. "Probably just a deer," Ryan said, chuckling nervously. I tried to smile, but I couldn't shake this growing feeling that something was off. There were more sounds, rustling, footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They stopped when we went silent and listened. My mind raced. "Okay, that was definitely not a deer," Ryan whispered, his voice low. We shone our flashlights out into the woods, scanning the trees, seeing nothing but darkness and branches that swayed lazily in the breeze. There was no movement, no glint of eyes reflecting back at us. "Hello? Anyone out there?" I called out, half hoping and half terrified that someone would answer. Silence. "Maybe it's just another camper," Ryan suggested, though the tone of his voice told me he didn't believe it. It didn't make sense for anyone to be out here, especially at this time of night. And that's when we heard it. A low, ragged breath. So close it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. My flashlight beam wavered as my hand trembled. Ryan grabbed a piece of burning firewood and held it up like a torch. We both turned in circles, trying to pinpoint where that breathing had come from, but the woods felt like a maze of shadows, ready to swallow us whole. Then we saw something. There, at the edge of the clearing, just past the glow of our fire, stood a man. He was dressed in a dirty, ragged coat, his face mostly obscured by a hood. But his eyes... wow, his eyes. They had reflected the firelight, wide and unblinking, staring right at us. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. "What do you want?" Ryan demanded, his voice cracking. The man didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, watching. We backed away slowly from our tent, trying to put some distance between us and the man. Ryan kept the firewood raised like a weapon, but I could see his knuckles going white, and I knew he was just as terrified as I was. "Maybe he'll leave," I whispered, but he didn't. The man stepped closer, one slow, deliberate footfall at a time. There was something wrong in the way he moved, like he was savoring our fear. "Dude, we need to go," Ryan finally said, his voice tight. We grabbed the keys to my truck, leaving most of our gear behind, and in a frantic blur, we sprinted through the woods, barely able to see where we were going. Branches scratched at my face and arms, but I didn't care. The man's footsteps followed, faster now, thudding in the darkness. When we finally burst out onto the dirt road where my truck was parked, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. Ryan kept looking over his shoulder, fear etched deep into his face. "Come on, hurry, hurry!" The engine roared to life, and we sped away, leaving the campsite, the fire, and the man behind. But even as we put distance between us and the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes burning into my back. We reported the incident to the local authorities the next morning, but they found nothing. No signs of a person, just our abandoned campsite, and one thing that still haunts me: a set of footprints circling our tent. Again and again, like someone had been watching us for hours. Camping had always been my thing, a cherished escape, a way to step out of the noise of daily life. This time, I decided to go solo, something I had done before, but never in a spot quite as isolated as this. I'd picked a hidden nook deep in the forest, known only to serious hikers. It was beautiful, serene, untouched. When I arrived, I felt that familiar thrill of freedom. The woods were alive with birdsong, and golden light streamed through the towering pines. I set up camp, pitching my tent close to the river that carved through the woods. As I gathered firewood, I took in the sights and sounds, feeling at peace. Dusk settled in quickly. I cooked a simple meal over my fire and watched the sky fade from purple to inky black, stars beginning to glitter. The crackling fire was the only sound besides the whisper of the river and the occasional rustle of leaves. That's when I noticed it. The silence. The birds had gone quiet. No more rustling, no wind, just stillness. Then a low thud echoed from somewhere deep in the forest. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to stay calm. It was probably a tree branch falling, I reasoned. Then I heard something else. A soft rustling sound, slow and methodical, moving around my campsite. I stood up, clutching my flashlight, and shone the beam around. The trees were thick, shadows stretching endlessly, but I saw nothing. "Hello?" I called, hoping for a human response. Maybe another hiker out late. But silence greeted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I tried to ignore the dread and focus on my fire, there was a louder noise, a sharp crack, like someone stepping on a twig. This time, it was close. I swung my flashlight around wildly. At the edge of my camp, just barely visible, was something that made my blood run cold. Hanging from a low tree branch was a ragged piece of fabric, fluttering like a forgotten flag in the wind. I knew it hadn't been there before. It was dark, dirt-stained, and torn, as if ripped from someone's clothing. I shivered and backed closer to the fire. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My mind raced. Was someone playing a prank? Or was it something worse? I grabbed my backpack and moved closer to my tent, trying to decide if I should pack up and leave. Then, just as I unzipped the tent flap, I heard the most chilling sound yet. A soft, whispery laugh. It drifted out from the woods, unmistakably human and yet wrong. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I didn't wait to see who or what had made that sound. I grabbed my essentials and bolted, barely remembering to snatch up my car keys. I sprinted down the dark trail, stumbling over roots and rocks, my flashlight bobbling wildly in the blackness. The laughter followed me, echoing through the trees, until I finally burst out into the clearing where my car was parked. Hands trembling, I jammed the key into the lock, threw myself inside, and sped off down the dirt road, not daring to look back. When I got home, I couldn't sleep for days. My mind kept replaying the laugh, that piece of fabric, the suffocating sense of being watched. The forest, once a place of solace, now felt haunted, like a space shared with someone or something I never wanted to meet again. Months later, I read a news article about a hiker gone missing in that very area. They found his campsite abandoned, tent shredded, but no sign of him. And in the photos they shared, one image struck me cold. A piece of torn, dart-stained fabric clinging to a low branch, eerily familiar, was in the background of the photo. When my boyfriend Jake and I decided to take a weekend camping trip in the woods, it was supposed to be an adventure. We'd picked a spot deep in the national forest, far away from any roads or trails, hoping for a slice of untouched wilderness. It was late autumn, the air crisp and the forest blanketed in a layer of vibrant fallen leaves. We set up camp early and spent the day exploring, laughing, and marveling at how quiet it was out there. As the sun dipped low, casting shadows between the trees, we built a fire and settled in. But as we sat there, roasting marshmallows, a strange smell drifted through the clearing. It was sharp, metallic, like rusting iron. I wrinkled my nose. "Do you smell that?" I asked, but Jake was focused on the fire, poking at the embers. "Probably just the river or something." But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. As night fully took hold, the odor grew stronger, more pungent, mixing with the scent of decaying leaves. I needed to know what it was, so I grabbed our flashlight and ventured a few steps into the woods. Jake stayed by the fire, calling out after me, but I waved him off. The smell was leading me, pulling me deeper into the trees. About 20 yards from our camp, the ground changed. The forest floor, once thick with leaves, was disturbed. The soil churned and scattered. Something had been dragged through here. The flashlight beam shook in my hands as I followed the trail, feeling dread build with every step. That's when I saw it. A large, freshly dug hole. I felt the bile rise in my throat. The dirt around the edges was stained dark, and I just knew, that whatever was in that hole wasn't supposed to be found. Before I could process it, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I whipped around, shining my light frantically, but nothing moved. My pulse was pounding, my breaths coming out in shallow gasps. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the hole. That's when I heard a whisper. It was low, almost imperceptible, a voice carried on the wind. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around again, the flashlight beam flickering. There was no one there, but the shadows seemed to press in, heavy and close. I backed away from the hole, the voice echoing in my mind. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not stopping until I burst back into our camp. Jake jumped up, startled. "What were you doing? You look like you've seen a ghost." "We have to leave, now." My voice shook, and I couldn't hide the terror in my eyes. Jake didn't argue with me. He must have seen how serious I was. We threw everything into our packs, not caring about neatness, and snuffed out the fire. Within minutes, we were hiking as fast as we could back to the car, every shadow seeming to slither closer, the forest whispering with that same eerie voice. As we finally reached the dirt road where we'd parked, I dared to look back just once. Standing at the edge of the woods, barely illuminated by our dying flashlight beam, was a figure. It was tall, thin, and draped in a filthy, tattered coat, watching us with eyes that reflected the pale moonlight. I grabbed Jake's arm, and we sped off. The image of that figure burned into my mind. The next day, I called the park rangers. They said they'd investigate the area, but never found anything unusual. No fresh dirt, no signs of disturbance. But I know what I saw. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that whisper, reminding me that some things buried in the woods should stay undiscovered.